Friends, if I could have everybody's attention, please. If we could just take a moment to collect ourselves, if we could please find our seats. Just a gentle reminder, if anybody does have a phone, please take a moment to turn it on silent. On behalf of the family, I want to thank those of us who are here, but also those who are joining us on the live stream. Please rise. Friends, you may be seated. In a few moments, we'll begin the service for Nathan Julian Levy of blessed memory. Officiating our service today is Rabbi Yochanan Posner.
We'll begin by reciting Psalm 23, first in Hebrew. Mizmar LeDavid, Adonai roi lo yechsar. Binois deshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchos yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshoivev yancheni, magli tzedek leman shemoi. Gam ki elech begeit samaves, lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Shiftecha umishantecha heima yinachamuni. Taroich lefanai shulcha neged tzoirai. Deshanta vashemen roishi kaisi revaya. Ach toiva chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayoi. V'shati b'sadinai la'oirech yamim. Now in English, in the service folders. Please read with me. The Lord my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We've gathered here today to celebrate the life of Nathan Julian Levy, Naftali Yehuda ben Yisrael Halevi. Nathan was born on July 14th, 1928, in Radzejew, Poland. He was the youngest in his family. His father was a baker, and the family lived in the bakery building. They were surrounded by a loving, extended family of aunts and uncles and cousins, as well as neighbors and friends in their community. Nathan's mother was Miriam. She loved to follow the news and politics. Aware of Hitler's rise, she wisely thought it would be smart to emigrate to the United States. Nathan's father was reluctant, but being a good Jewish man, he followed his wife. And in 1937 or 38, they moved. and thereby they probably saved the lives of their nuclear family. Tragically, much of the extended family was murdered in the Holocaust. This fact stayed with Nathan for his entire life, but without bitterness. He was a happy and cheerful person. They moved to the south side of Milwaukee. There, two uncles had a grocery store, and that is where Nathan grew up. 1952 to 54, he served 2 years of the Korean War working the supply room here in the United States. Nate was always interested in business. He enjoyed being the scrappy entrepreneur. So, after the Army, he earned his associate's degree at the University of Wisconsin, and he became a buyer for Majestic Catalog and lived in Milwaukee. Nathan's cousin, Bernice Newman, came from the same town in Poland, Radziejew, but she lived in Chicago. And her home in the Bulldog Woods area of Chicago backed up by the alley to Diane's home. And that's how Nathan and Diane were set up for a blind date in the spring of 1971. All Diane knew going in about him was that he came from a religious family, which worked well for her, and she was prepared to eat a kosher dinner with him that night. Now, although Nate didn't always eat only kosher, kosher was very important to him, and Diane and Nate kept a kosher home consistently and even kept a separate kosher stuff for Passover. Back to the date. So Nate drove Diane to the John Hancock building, and she immediately recognized Nate's good qualities. In Nate, she found a man who was gentle, kind, gracious, cheerful, humorous, and also determined and with perseverance. A man whose love is intense and real and constant. A man who worked hard, never complained, and somehow, magically, made everything he touched better. In short, Diane found a mensch. She especially appreciated that he was good with kids by the way he willingly went on the floor with her nieces and nephews. And so, 6 short months later, they were married in November of 1971. She was 30, he was 43, and thus began 52 years of always being together. In 1972, Melissa was born. In 1973, Michael was born. At that time, Diane took a break from her job as a teacher to raise the kids, and Nate supported the family single-handedly. Eventually, he was done with the catalog business, and Nathan began a second career at the Secretary of State, administering road tests. This lasted for 22 years, including suffering a car accident in a road test in the early 90s. Although this job clearly had occupational hazards, it also presented some benefits, which perfectly suited Nate's friendly and outgoing personality. He met all kinds of people because everyone needs a driver's license. So he met his kids' teenage friends, he met celebrities who signed autographs for his kids. And for Nathan, his family was always front and center. In general, he worked hard and long hours and provided a comfortable living for his family. That was his life. His life was all about protecting and sheltering others. His relationship with his nieces and his nephews was close and ongoing and fatherly, and each have many stories to share about their favorite uncle. Lenny and Sharon and Dan and Aviva and David and Michael and Andy and Leslie and Stacy. For all of them, Uncle Nate was almost like another parent. Now, he also had another job at night, and during the weekends, he would pick up merchandise cheaply at the trade shows and sell it for a profit at the flea market. He began his day early, and he ended his day late, and he worked hard to comfortably support Diane and Melissa and Michael. And this too suited him very well. He felt good about being a provider. He enjoyed the entrepreneurial business side, and he was a genius in regards to meeting people and striking up relationships. Nate and Diane bought their house on Knox in Skokie in 1990, and they gave their children the best possible upbringing. They observed all the Jewish holidays, Melissa and Michael attended Hebrew school multiple days a week. They celebrated bar and bas mitzvahs, and Nate taught his children about the importance of prioritizing Judaism and Jewish observance. Nate and Diane took their kids on memorable family vacations, usually a road trip with some educational or historical value. Now, amazingly, it actually worked, and it gave Michael a certain A+ only because of those trips. But Diane knows that the real value of those trips was to enjoy being with Nate because everything with him was so special. Nate's personality was unique in the sense that his spark and his zest for life shone brightly. He would exude a good mood always. He would tell jokes with relish. He would smile before the punchline. And it was like his whole body was bursting to jump out and tell you this amazing joke that you just had to hear. People called him the mayor of Skokie because he knew so many people. He created the neighborhood watch on his block. He would meet people. He would talk with people. That's how he met me. I was visiting a neighbor on the block, and I locked my keys in the car. Nate came over. He chatted me up, drove me home to get the spare keys, drove me back to the car, and stayed in touch ever since then. We've been friends since then. Nate was a sports fan, especially a Packers fan. He was loyal to the Packers all his life, even though, do the math, he lived here more than half of his life. As he told Jeff, if the Packers lost, he said, I didn't watch that game, so it didn't count. So they always won, obviously. And the best of all for Nate was if he could combine all his loves, his pleasure at meeting new people and relationships with sports as a Packers fan and a Chicago area resident with giving his kids a fun time. That was a score. So what happened was he went with his kids to see Lambeau Field for the Packers. And of course, Nate chatted up the equipment maintenance guy over there, who gave them some press packets and some nice stuff, and said, you know what? Stay in touch. When the Packers play the Bears, you call me. Sure enough, this maintenance guy gave Nate and his children a tour of the Soldier Field locker room before the game started. Everything together at once. Or if Nate could combine his love for family with scrappy entrepreneur with love for video camera. Also, great deal. This happened while his knee was broken from the car accident. That time he was carrying a cane around with him. And it was Michael's graduation. The graduation was in the university courtroom. And so the judges sat in front, or the professor sat in front where the judges sit, and the crowd sat on the benches. Somehow, Nate finangled himself the best position in the courtroom, the witness box, with his cane and with his video camera. What could be better? Eventually, Melissa and Michael grew up, moved out of the house. Nathan retired, and Nathan and Diane settled gracefully into enjoying old age. But Nate remained active, gardening, housework, and enjoying being with Diane. He was devoted to Diane. They aged together, they took care of each other, and for their entire lives, from when they met, they complemented each other. They would travel every year to Florida, which is the Jewish Israel, to the actual Israel, and to Europe. The way he raised his kids stood by them in adulthood also, and he enjoyed their successes. His support helped them rise higher, always proud of their accomplishments, and he rooted for them. He always knew the stock prices of the company that Michael was involved in. He rooted for those stock prices like he did for the Packers. He tracked them, and he memorized their football scores. Melissa worked in media as a journalist and in public relations, and Nate kept a file of all of her stories, and he pushed his push cart full of media packets for her in the merchandise mart. And at Michael and Sonia's wedding, when Nate spoke, he couldn't resist leaking proudly that this speech was written by Melissa. He loved his granddaughters. Jordan, born in 2011, Miriam in 2013, and Miriam was named for his mother. When Sonia called Nate after the birth and told Nate that the baby's name is Miriam, they both cried. He wanted to play with them. He was very hands-on. He would throw them in the air and catch them. He was a great grandfather. Eventually, Nathan and Diane moved to Gidwit's place for assisted living, and he loved it. It was perfect. The religious services, he could volunteer to welcome and greet new people. The food was kosher. It was literally a second home. In December of this past year, Nate fell. Being immobile changed his life. But what's interesting is that his underlying goodness and humanity came out even stronger when he couldn't get around. When the nurses came in, he would say, "How are you?" Instead of them asking how he's doing, it was him asking them how they're doing. He was selfless. He wouldn't show pain. People shouldn't worry about him. And he lived by his principles in the 94 years of his lifetime and also in his passing. Here are some examples of how Nate lived by his principles in his life and in his passing. He put his family first. And he did so even when he was bedridden and needed help at the end of his life. He would tell Michael, "Go home to your wife and kids." He told Melissa, "Go home, go to your job." He was careful to greet people kindly and say hello. He would say thank you and goodbye. And that's how he ended his life, with his family around him, so they all can say goodbye. And now he's saying hello to his brother Bernie, who was his best friend, who died and didn't say goodbye. Thankfully, Nate's sister-in-law, Judy, is still alive and well. He took pride in his work. He did a good job and ended his life with no regrets. He passed peacefully. He was never late for work, ever. At the end of his life, when it was time, it was time. And his soul arrived in heaven on time to do its next job in the next world. During his lifetime, he prioritized Judaism and religious observance, and his funeral and subsequent mourning is being done in the halachically best way by Orthodox standards. He certainly is returning his soul to its maker in better condition than he received it. Tehei nafshoy tzura b'tzor ha'chaim, may his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Now, here's some personal words from Melissa and then from Michael.
Thank you. My dad was a wonderful storyteller, so it seems fitting to share a brief family tale. At the age of 15, I had my tonsils removed. I was pretty groggy from the surgery when Dad entered my hospital room, as always, several paces in front of my mom. Unfortunately, I took one look at him and cried out, "I want my mommy!" Crestfallen, Dad never let me forget that one, even repeating it to me last week, always with his signature smile that lit up his eyes. The truth is, and he knew it, is that I've always been and always will be a daddy's girl. And he was always my biggest cheerleader. Sorry. Dad supported my brother and I through every relationship, school, career, and geographic move. He went as far as to give me his car to drive to my post-college journalism fellowship in Phoenix because he was worried that mine wouldn't make the trip, but there safely. To paraphrase the ads at the time, it literally was my father's Oldsmobile, and it allowed me to chase my dreams. Dad valued education, both book smarts and people smarts. My niece Jordan this morning asked me to make sure that I mentioned how Zadie loved her and her sister Miriam and granddaughter Bella, and how he was so committed to making sure they'd have the education they'd need for the future success. Dad took pride in leaving things better than he found them, often taking apart and cleaning borrowed items to return them in like new condition. Similarly, he took a great deal of genuine interest in others' lives, being present, listening, supporting, and involving. We have family here today who dropped everything to travel from Florida, Indiana, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Wisconsin to honor Nate. That's 9 states, and I know I may be missing some. Our family is so touched that you did this, and we know that it's a testament to the loving, meaningful relationships you shared with him. Dad's sweet nature and enduring legacy of kindness, integrity, loyalty, and positivity extended to all of his friends and family, and even to complete strangers. For example, he volunteered to welcome newcomers to Gidwit's Place, where he and my parents moved 4 years ago. One of the residents approached my mom and myself on Friday night when we were there for services to recall that Dad was the first person who spoke to her when she moved in and instantly made her feel at home. Ever the marketer, she said my dad enthusiastically gestured to the patio outside to note that it was a great place to sit. Granted, it was January and snowy at the time, but she said he was right and it was worth the wait to get out there. Speaking of being worth the wait, as the rabbi said, my mom was 30 and my dad was 43 when they married 51 years ago, which at the time was very unusual. Mom says that she waited for the right one, and it was the best decision she ever made. I couldn't agree more. They are true role models for relationship goals and commitment to family. This Super Bowl Saturday, I would be remiss if I didn't quickly give a nod to Dad's other longtime obsession, the Green Bay Packers, and pretty much every Wisconsin sports team. Even half a century of living in Illinois with us Bears fans couldn't break him of the habit. When he transferred to Whitehall on February 1st, he asked me to write down 3 channels from the facility's cable listing: MSNBC and CNN to watch the news, and Fox to be able to watch the Super Bowl. I will miss our frequent phone calls to break down the scores of games, his not-so-gentle ribbing of Jeff when the Minnesota Vikings lost, and his insistence that if the Packers lost, it must not have been on TV in Chicago and therefore didn't count. We all feel incredibly fortunate that Dad remained healthy and sharp at age 94. He did have a challenging couple of months after fracturing his hip in December, so while heartbroken, we also find comfort that he is at peace. When I was younger, my dad would often end our conversations by telling me, "I love you this much," stretching his arms as far as he could reach. So I'd like to close by doing the same. Daddy, I love you this much, always and forever.
I'm here today to talk about the beautiful, beautiful person who was my father, Nathan Julian Levy. He was a very lucky man who could count on more than 2 of his hands, the ones that he loved and the ones who loved him. I want to discuss 3 things that I learned from my father. First, family first. He was so devoted to his family, not just my mother, sister, me, our spouses, and his grandchildren, but his whole family, including nieces and nephews. Whether rolling around on the floor, playing with kids, wanting to know the latest news in your life, providing emotional support, or just being present with his whole personality. His family meant so much to him, and he meant so much to his family. He always did whatever was needed without complaint. And with his support, you felt like you could do anything. You could take chances. You could reach for the stars because he was behind you, offering unconditional love, whether you succeeded or failed. Second, his work ethic. He was a provider for our family in the fullest sense of the word. He worked as many as 3 jobs at one time to provide extra money for our family. Sometimes he worked 6 or 7 days a week for at least 10 hours a day. He took pride in his work. He was never late. He never phoned it in. Even in retirement, he was constantly busy with projects around the house. I can't tell you how many times he took me aside and said, "Let me show you something." And he'd walk me into the backyard to show his latest prized tomato that he'd grown in his garden. And I'll say that it was also just very on brand for him to start a neighborhood watch and end up collecting rabbis as part of it. His face would always light up with pride at a job well done. Third, his selflessness, his kindness to others. My father lived a life of quiet dignity, always in service to others, both within the family and outside of it. He did what was needed without seeking personal credit. He was a connector who was always so interested in the lives of others. Even in the hospital, as was mentioned, he would stop to ask the nurses how they were doing before he would answer how he was doing. He did the right thing for its own sake. He was a righteous person of integrity and honor. He was a mensch. If I can be 1/10 of the person my father was, I know I will still live a full and complete life and make the world a better place. In the end, you're tempted to be angry or jealous because other people are recovering and being discharged, or because you want to spend one more hour, one more day, one more week with your father. But I take comfort in knowing that he lived a full and complete life, 94 years. He lived a life of meaning that impacted the people around him. In the end, he was at peace and he was ready to go, surrounded by his family. So I have to respect his wishes. He would want us to remember him, but he would also want us to continue living full and amazing lives. Please continue reaching for the stars. He would want that for all of us. Dad, you always had such a joy for life. You lit up every room you were in. You will be missed. I love you, and your memory will always be for a blessing.
Thank you, very nice. Now we're going to recite Kel Mole. So I'm going to ask everyone to please rise. El Mole Rachamim Shoichen Bam Roimim Hamtzei Menucha Nechoina Al Kanfei Ashchina B'Mailes Kedoshim Utahirim Kezer Harakiem Azhirim Es Nishmas Naftali Yehuda Ben Yisrael Halevi Shahal Lachloi Lamai Bavursh Nestak Avaz Karas Nishmasai Eden Temenuchasai Lachain Balarachim Yastirebes Esterkaf Leilamim Yisrachaim Sishmasai Adonai Nachlasai Vinocham Shkaber Shalom Vinoi Maramein. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest in the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure ones, who shine like the glow of the firmament, for the soul of Nathan, Julian, Levy, Naftali Yehuda Ben Yisrael Halevi, who went onto his world, because people are contributing charity in remembrance of his soul. May his resting place be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, may the Master of Mercy shelter him in the shelter of his wings for eternity, and may he bind his soul in the bond of life. Hashem is his heritage, and may he repose in his place, in peace in his resting place. Let us respond, Amen. Please be seated.
Friends, this concludes our service here at the chapel. The interment will take place immediately at the family plots at West Lawn Cemetery in Norwich. Upon return from the cemetery, the Levy family will be sitting Shiva at the residence 1046 Prairie Avenue in Deerfield until 8 p.m. Monday 4 to 7, and there will also be a gathering at the Gidwitz Place on Tuesday. Moral contributions in Mr. Levy's memory can be made to CJE Senior Life. That information, as well as the Shiva hours, are available for those who have the service folder, and for those who are online, that information is online. For those joining us in procession to the cemetery, one will be forming in the parking lot. Please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker to place atop the roof of your vehicle. Please make sure you also obtain an orange funeral safety sticker. That can be placed on the inside windshield portion of your vehicle. When in procession, please make sure your bright lights, hazard lights are on at all time. Please drive as closely to the car in front of you as safety permits, especially as we go through intersections, as we want to avoid any large gaps. Please use your horn liberally while in procession to the cemetery. Please refrain from talking on your cellular phones while in procession. The following individuals have been honored to serve as pallbearers. When I call your name, if you could please stand next to Mr. Levy's casket. Leonard Marcus, Dan Levy, David Levine, Michael Levine, Andy Levin, and Aaron Settler. At this time, if I could ask everyone to please rise as we escort Mr. Levy's casket, the family, and the rabbi from the chapel.